Before you keep reading, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. It doesn't matter if it's midnight in Vancouver or a Tuesday afternoon in Halifax. I want to know you're there, and if stories like this one hit close to home, subscribe. There are more coming, and some of them are going to stay with you for a long time. Now, let me tell you about the night Gwendolyn Marsh stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and understood, with a clarity that felt almost surgical, that the man sitting at the granite island, her husband of 7 years, had just introduced her to the woman he had been sleeping with for the past 2 of them. He said it was a work dinner. He said Priya was a consultant. He said, with the particular calmness of a man who has rehearsed something many times, "Gwen, you're misreading this." Gwendolyn looked at him. She looked at Priya. She looked at the open bottle of wine on the counter. The Burgundy she had been saving, the one her father had given her the Christmas before he died. And she said nothing. She set her bag down on the chair by the door, walked past both of them to the hallway, went upstairs, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a very long time. She did not cry. She had been preparing for this in the quiet part of herself for longer than she wanted to admit. Gwendolyn Ashcroft had grown up in a small house on the eastern edge of Fredericton, the kind of house where the baseboards were always slightly crooked and the smell of wood smoke never fully left the curtains, no matter how many times her mother washed them. Her father, Martin Ashcroft, had been a structural engineer who worked long contracts in northern Alberta and came home every 6 weeks, smelling of diesel and cold air. Her mother, Ruth, had taught grade 4 at the same school for 23 years and graded papers at the kitchen table every Sunday night with a red pen and a cup of tea that always went cold before she finished it. They were not wealthy. They were not prominent. But there was something in that house, a kind of steadiness, that Gwendolyn had carried with her everywhere she went after she left. She left at 17 on a full academic scholarship to Dalhousie, studied biochemistry, because it was the hardest thing she could find, and finished in the top 3% of her year. She stayed in Halifax for a master's degree, then moved to Toronto for a position at a biotech research firm that most people in the industry had barely heard of at the time. That was 11 years before the night, with the wine bottle. The firm was called Ashvale Therapeutics. By the time Gwendolyn joined as a juniors researcher, it had 12 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse in Scarborough, with a parking lot full of potholes. She didn't mind. She had always been more comfortable in places that were underestimated. She knew what that felt like. She met Dominic at a conference in Ottawa. He was 38. She was 31. He was the kind of man who filled a room not because he was loud, but because he always seemed to be at the center of whatever conversation mattered most. He ran a mid-sized private equity firm that had made several significant bets on clean technology and healthcare, and he was charming in the way that very few people are, not performatively, but genuinely, in a way that made you feel seen, even when you suspected later that you had been managed. They dated for 14 months before he proposed. The ring was beautiful. The proposal was not elaborate. He did it in her apartment on a Sunday morning, while she was still in her pajamas, sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the oven because the floor was warm, and he got down on one knee on the tile and said, "I think you're the most interesting person I've ever met, and I don't want to stop finding out what that means." She said yes without hesitating. For the first 2 years, it was good. It was genuinely good. They bought a house in Rosedale. They had dinner parties with people who talked about things that mattered. They took a week in the Maritimes every August and stayed at a small inn near Lunenburg where the owner knew their names and always left a bottle of something local on the porch. Then the years started to change shape. She didn't notice it at first. She was deep inside a research project, a proprietary compound that Ashvale had been developing quietly for 4 years, something that had the potential to significantly alter treatment outcomes for a particular category of autoimmune disorder. The work consumed her. Evenings, weekends, the long, slow hours between midnight and 3 in the morning when the lab was empty, and she could think without interruption. She knew she was absent from the marriage in the way that work makes people absent. She told herself she would be present again when the project was finished. Dominic said he understood. He said all the right things. He was patient, or performed patience so well, that she couldn't locate the seam. What she did not know, what she would not know for 2 more years, was that the patience had run out at roughly the same time she had begun the most important phase of the research. That around the same time she had been working on the compound that would eventually make Ashevale a household name. In the Canadian healthcare sector, Dominic had begun spending long evenings with a woman named Priya Mehta, who had indeed been hired as a consultant for his firm, and who was beautiful and unencumbered and entirely present in the way that Gwendolyn had stopped being. This was the thing Gwendolyn would spend a long time untangling afterward, whether she had been naive or whether she had simply trusted someone who did not deserve it. She eventually decided the question didn't matter. What you do next is the only thing that matters. That was something her father had said to her once, after she failed a chemistry exam in her first semester at Dalhousie and called home crying from a phone booth in the rain. She had not understood it fully then. She understood it completely now. The night she found them in the kitchen. She did not make a scene. She did not throw the wine. She did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. She went upstairs, she sat in the dark, and she thought. She thought about the research, which was now in its final documentation phase. She thought about the agreement she had signed with Ashevale 3 years ago. An agreement that had given her a significant equity stake in exchange for staying through the clinical phase. She thought about the call she had received 6 weeks earlier from the firm's legal counsel, a call she had not mentioned to Dominic, in which she had been informed that a major pharmaceutical company had made an acquisition offer, and that her equity position, if she chose to exercise it, was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $460 million. She had not mentioned it because she had still been deciding what to do with the information. She had a habit of sitting with large things before she moved on them. It was the same instinct that made her a good researcher. Patience with uncertainty, comfort with the unknown. Now, sitting in the dark in the house in Rosedale, she made her decision. She lay down on her side of the bed. She pulled the duvet up, and she slept with a steadiness that would have surprised her husband if he had come upstairs, which he did not. She did not leave immediately. She had never been impulsive. The people who were watching, the people who knew the contours of the marriage from the outside, who had seen what she carried, without understanding its weight, did not understand the choice to stay through the next 4 months. They would have said, "Why? What are you waiting for? Why would anyone remain in a house with a person who had betrayed them?" The answer was not complicated. She was staying because she had work to finish, and because her leaving, when it happened, would happen on her terms, and not under the influence of grief or anger. She had watched enough people make large decisions while their hands were shaking. She had watched enough people destroy the thing they were building because they could not wait long enough for it to be ready. She finished her documentation. She exercised her equity. She found a lawyer. Not the kind of lawyer Dominic knew, but the kind of lawyer you find when you've spent a decade being underestimated by rooms full of men who assumed your name on the paper was decorative. Her name was Charlotte Graves, and she had spent 20 years in family law in Toronto. And she was exactly as thorough as her reputation suggested. The papers were filed on a Thursday morning in November, 4 months after the night with the wine bottle. Gwendolyn had already arranged a lease on a furnished apartment near the waterfront. She had already told the people who needed to know. She had already made the practical decisions that people in shock cannot make. She told Dominic on a Thursday evening when he came home to find her sitting in the living room with her coat on and 2 bags by the door. "I'm leaving," she said. "The papers were filed this morning. Charlotte Graves is handling it. You should get your own counsel." He stared at her. He said her name. He said she was being dramatic. She looked at him with a particular quality of attention that had made her exceptional at her work. The ability to see something clearly without being moved by what she wanted it to be. And she said, "I'm not being dramatic, Dominic. I'm being finished." She picked up her bags and walked out. He followed her to the front steps. He said things, apologies that had the structural quality of arguments, explanations that kept inserting themselves in the wrong places, the words that men offer when they are not yet afraid, and are still operating under the assumption that the person leaving will turn around. She did not turn around. She put her bags in the car. She had called. She got in. She looked straight ahead. He stood on the front steps of the house in Rosedale in the cold November air, and she did not look back once. What followed was not a war. It was a settlement, and it was swift, because Gwendolyn had structured it to be swift, and because Charlotte was very good at her job, and because Dominic understood within the first two men that he had badly misjudged the of the person he had been married to. He had thought she was gentle. He had mistaken steadiness for softness, which was the most common error people made with Gwendolyn, and she had never corrected it, because she had always found it more useful to be underestimated. The settlement was not punitive. She did not want to hurt him. She had loved him once, genuinely, and she was not a person who revised the past to make the present more comfortable. She had loved him. He had made choices that ended the marriage. Both things were true. She moved through the proceedings with the same quality she brought to everything, deliberate, precise, without performance. The Rosedale house went on the market in January. She did not take it. She did not want it. What she took was the Lunenburg deposit she had made the summer before, the one Dominic had not known about, for the small inn near the water where the owner knew their names. She had called ahead in October, quietly, and made an arrangement. The owner, a woman in her 70s named Claire Donovan, who had run the place salon since her husband passed, had listened without asking many questions and then said, "I have a cottage that's been sitting empty since the spring. It's yours if you want it." Gwendolyn wanted it. She drove to Lunenburg in February, which was not the season most people would have chosen. The highway through New Brunswick was gray and the birches were bare, and the towns she passed through had the particular emptiness of places where everyone has gone inside and is waiting for something to shift. She drove 11 hours with a thermos of coffee and the radio on low, and she felt, for the first time in longer than she could pinpoint, like herself. The cottage sat at the edge of Claire's property, 20 meters from the water. It had 4 rooms and a wood stove and windows that faced east. In the mornings, the light came through in a way that made everything look like it was being considered carefully before being committed to. She unpacked one bag. She put her laptop on the table by the window. She made tea with a kettle that took 4 minutes to boil because the burner was old, and she drank it standing at the window, looking out at the harbor, which was gray and textured and completely indifferent to her presence, and she felt something in her chest that was not happiness, but was the accurate precursor to it. She began working again the following Monday. Not for Asheville. That chapter was closed. She had spent the last year of the marriage doing something else, something she had never mentioned to Dominic. Not because she was hiding it, but because some things you protect from the people who would find a way to diminish them. She had been writing. Not papers, not research. A book. A proper one. The kind she had been refusing to write since her doctoral supervisor had told her 15 years ago that she had a way of making difficult science feel like something you could hold in your hands. She had spent 2 years writing it in the gaps the research left, and now it was done, and she had a publisher in Toronto who was waiting for the final draft. The book was about how cellular systems adapt to prolonged stress, how the body, under pressure over long periods of time, does not simply degrade, it restructures. It finds new pathways. It becomes, in some measurable sense, more capable than it was before the stress was introduced. She had written it as science, but she knew sitting at the window with her tea that she had also written it about herself. The book came out in September. By November it was on the Globe and Mail bestseller list, which surprised the publisher and did not surprise Gwendolyn. She had written it for people who were intelligent and tired, who wanted to understand something true about the way difficult things change you, and there turned out to be a very large number of those people. She did interviews from the cottage, by phone and video, sitting at the table by the window, with the harbor behind her. The interviewers always asked about the setting. She always said, simply, that she had needed to come somewhere quiet. None of them knew about the acquisition. None of them knew about Charlotte Graves or the papers filed on a Thursday morning or the 2 bags by the door. She had not made any of that part of the story because it was not theirs to have. In December, Asheville was officially acquired. The announcement was made on a Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, several of the technology and business journalists who had been tracking the deal had connected Gwendolyn's name to the transaction and published pieces about the lead researcher behind the compound. Pieces that included, in varying degrees of accuracy, references to the financial terms of her equity position. Dominic read one of those pieces on a Wednesday afternoon in his office on King Street. He had known she was successful. He had not known the shape of it. He had assumed, in the particular way of people who have underestimated someone for long enough that the assumption has become structural, that her work was important, but not that important, not that significant, not that large. He sat in his office for a long time after he finished reading. His assistant came in twice and he didn't acknowledge her. Waiting. He thought about the night he had come upstairs after Priya had left and found the bedroom dark and Gwendolyn already asleep, lying completely still on her side of the bed. And he had stood in the doorway for a moment, trying to read the quality of her stillness, whether it was hurt or anger or indifference, and had been unable to determine it, and had gone to the guest room and told himself the conversation could wait until morning. And the morning came, and she was dressed and professional and calm, and the conversation never arrived. He thought about the conversation that never arrived. He thought about the wine, his father-in-law's wine, which he had opened without thinking, because he had stopped thinking about the things that mattered to her, which was not something that had happened in a dramatic moment, but had happened the way most losses happen. Gradually, in the ordinary accumulation of small choices made, he picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again. He called her. She answered on the 4th ring. Dominic, she said, just her name for him. No warmth, but no frost either, simply acknowledgement. I saw the piece, he said. I imagine a lot of people did. He did not know how to say what he wanted to say, which was that he was sorry in a way that had nothing to do with the money. That he had always known she was remarkable and had, somehow, in the dailiness of things, stopped acting as though that were true, and that he understood now, with a sharpness he had not expected, the specific scale of what he had thrown away. He said, I didn't know. She was quiet for a moment.
Then she said, yes, you did, Dominic. You just didn't pay attention.
It was not unkind. It was simply accurate, and she had always been better at accuracy than kindness when kindness would have been a distortion. I'm sorry, he said. I mean that. I know you do, she said. It matters. It's just, it doesn't change anything. He knew it didn't. He had known it before he called. He had called anyway because there are some apologies you give not to repair something, but because the weight of not giving them becomes its own damage. Are you happy? He asked. She looked out the window at the harbor. The ice had come in along the edges of the dock. A cormorant was sitting on one of the pilings, absolutely still, looking out at the water with the focused patience of a thing that has learned exactly what it is waiting for. I'm getting there, she said. She meant it. It was one of the truest things she had said in years. They said goodbye. She set her phone face down on the table. She sat for a while. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work on the proposal for the second book, which was about recovery, about the mechanisms by which living systems of significant disruption find their way back to function. She had a great deal of material. That spring, Claire's granddaughter came to stay at the inn for the summer, a 22-year-old from Halifax named Isla, who was taking a gap year to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. Isla spent a lot of time on the dock in the evenings, and one evening she wandered over to the cottage porch where Gwendolyn was sitting with a book and asked, with the directness of someone young enough to still ask things directly, how do you know? When you're done being sad about something. Gwendolyn thought about it genuinely, the way she thought about all questions that deserved a genuine answer. I think, she said, you're done being sad about it when you stop needing it to have been different, when you can look at it and just let it be what it was. Isla looked at the water. That sounds hard. It is, Gwendolyn said. but it's also the only way through. Isla nodded, with the seriousness of someone filing something away. Gwendolyn went back to her book. The sun went down over the ridge behind the inn in long, slow increments, the way the light goes down in Nova Scotia in May, reluctantly, as if it has more it wants to show you to before it leaves. She was not, at this point, a woman waiting for anything. She was not watching the door. She was not hoping for a call she could not name. She was not orienting her attention toward someone else's recognition of her worth, because she had spent the better part of a year learning with the same rigor she brought to research that the only recognition that restructures you. She had the book. They had the harbor. She had the wood stove and the east-facing windows and the kettle that took 4 minutes to boil. She had the proposal for the second book and the publisher, who was waiting, and the quiet, durable knowledge that the work she had done was good. She had, in the particular, through something long and hard and come out the other side of it, exactly what she needed. Not everything she had lost, not everything she had wanted, once, but everything that was real and solid and hers. The cormorant lifted off the piling in the fading light and crossed the harbor in a low, purposeful line, and was gone. She watched it go. She did not call anyone. She did not mark the moment. She simply sat with it, the way she had learned to sit with large things, not trying to fix them or accelerate them or make them into something that could be explained to someone else. Just let them be what they were. Just let them count